Welcome to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes Ministries. Thank you for listening. Janet will be talking about her struggle with addiction, alcohol, drugs, eating disorders, unwanted same-sex attraction, and living a homosexual life. Janet has survived all those things by the grace of God. Janet's not a doctor, she's not a therapist, she's not a psychotherapist, she's not a licensed counselor. Janet is an ordained pastor and wants to show you God's promises, how God has set her free, and how you can be set free. What He has done for her, He will do it for you. If healing and freedom are what you want, you have come to the right place at the right time. Let's get started. Here is Janet Boynes.
Now, this is really exciting for me because Jim and I don't do a lot of things together, but we know each other. And it's exciting to have Jim Domen on Healing and Made Free. And his ministry is called Church United. Jim, welcome to Healing and Made Free.
Hey, Janet, good to see you again. I think the last time we hung out was in Washington, D.C. at the United States Capitol.
It was in Washington, D.C., but you came to Texas to be a part of a documentary that I think we're both going to be a part of.
Yeah.
It should come out hopefully this year, next year. I don't know when they're going to have it, but I don't even think I had a chance to see you when you were here.
I think we missed each other. I think they just filmed you left, and I arrived. So
exactly.
Thank you for the reminder. I totally forgot about that documentary. I actually just shot one in LA last month.
That is exciting. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I saw that you had just did another documentary with someone. So that is really exciting. But I want to because Gay Pride is coming up, and even though I've done so many interviews that we'll be posting during May and June, because the gay community gets a whole month to try to torture us and try to exploit our children and indoctrinate our children. I want to interview as many men and women as possible that live that life, but successfully walked out of that life through the power of Jesus Christ. Jim, before we get started, you are married, you have children. At least give just a 1-minute synopsis of your family.
Sure. I met my beautiful bride through I'll call a divine mistake back in, oh my gosh, a long time ago. We'll have been married 15 years this July, and we have 3 beautiful children, 2 daughters and a son. Our girls are 10 and 5, and my son is 7. So it has been an amazing journey, Janet, to get to be not only a husband, but a father of our 3 children.
You know what? I noticed your eyes went up when you had to remember how old one of the 7-year-old was. It's like, boy, you better get this right, because your wife listening to this and like, you can't remember our kid's name. And you said with your wife that it wasn't a mistake.
Yeah, so it's kind of an amazing story. I talked about it in my book, Not a Mistake.
I was going to bring that up.
Son, but the chapter is called The Divine Mistake, and I was getting my seminary degree, Master of Divinity, at Azusa Pacific University, and in air, the school had mailed my diploma to the wrong address. It was returned, and I get this phone call. I'm single. I was actually the singles pastor at the time, or men's ministry pastor at our church.
Right.
And they said, hey, would you be willing, they said, what do you want us to do? I'm like, I'll drive up and get my diploma. And when I did, that's when I met my wife and married her 9 months later.
Boy, that was a divine connection.
It was.
Jim, let's talk about your story before I get into some of the root causes of homosexuality. Can you briefly share a little bit about your story? You shared about how you met your beautiful wife, and now you have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. But let's talk about your story.
Sure.
So many people don't think that trauma is a reason why people go into the life of homosexuality. Sometimes it's trauma, sometimes it's not. It's not. For my life, it was trauma. I believe for yours it is, but share with my audience just a brief.
Yeah, I actually would say I didn't have any trauma. I wasn't sexually abused, emotionally abused, physically abused by anyone. And really, I think a case like mine, well, I even say it would be similar to a trauma victim, it's developmental. And I grew up in every family is dysfunctional, Janet. I think we all know that, your listeners know that. But our family was more on the functioning side of dysfunction. My parents have been married for over 50 years. There's been no abuse in the family, physical, emotional, anything like that. My dad was an LA County sheriff, my mom a librarian. But Janet, I was a little different growing up. I was maybe a little bit more effeminate, connected more with my mom versus my dad. I wasn't good in sports. And so this kind of male identity, when you're developing that in these developmental stages early in life, I didn't really connect with my dad. I bonded with my mom. And it really goes to prove that LGBTQ issues are environmental and developmental. They're not genetic. You're not born this way. And what's happening in our culture today with the whole trans movement proves that our point that you and I have been saying for decades.
Mm-hmm. Jim, you said something that I think is important for our listeners to hear. You said that you connected more with mom and not enough with dad. But dad wasn't home all the time. So if dad is on the road all the time, he's working a lot, it's very difficult for a son to even connect with with dad, because you're always around mom 24/7. Is that correct?
I would agree with that. And I remember certain instances like connecting with my dad, but when it came to sports, I wasn't very good at them. My brother excelled, my sister excelled. They had a good relationship with my dad in our younger years. And I remember vividly when my mom was pregnant with my sister, I took care of her because my dad was working nights. And so he would sleep during the day or gone during the day. And I remember I was the one nurturing, caring for my mom when she had morning sickness, and kind of doing things. And I'm not saying it's wrong for little boys to care for their mom, siblings, or their dad, but I really think it began to develop an unhealthy relationship where I saw the eyes through the world of the feminine, unbeknownst to me, because as a little boy, you're not cognizant of what's happening with you environmentally, especially developmentally. And when you make those connections, when you hit puberty, those desires to want to connect with the dad or a man in an appropriate way become sexualized.
So let me ask you a quick question. So your brothers were athletic, you weren't. Dad worked at night. You connected more with mom because you're probably like me, a caretaker, because when my mother was abused by my father, everybody was outside playing. I stay in the house with mom out of fear that he's going to hit her again, and thought I could protect her as a kid, even though I couldn't. So I'm really good about nurturing people. However, you said that you didn't go through trauma. Isn't it traumatic when your brothers have a relationship with dad and you don't quite have that relationship with dad? Is that not traumatic?
Well, see, to me, trauma is if you're afraid of, like you mentioned, physical abuse, emotional abuse, something that is completely out of the ordinary.
Right.
My brother, yes, he did excel in sports as well as my sister, but I didn't. So kind of those sport connection relationships kind of fell to the wayside. I mean, dad,
But
I
you
tried.
could not mentally even comprehend
I don't
it
do
because
good
you
with
were
sports
involved in
with
it.
balls. I don't do sports good. So with baseball and soccer, I stunk. And after a year of each, I'm like, this isn't for me. And what ended up happening, I played on the sidelines, kind of with the girls, so to speak, or with
Right.
the girls on the street instead of all the boys who were playing on the soccer team, baseball team. And you begin to develop that feminine identity, even though I was a little boy.
Right. So, Jim, the number one sport right now is pickleball. Are you telling me you're not playing pickleball?
I am not, I don't think I'm old enough for that, Janet. All the old people in our community play
I'm playing
pickleball.
pickleball. I'm old.
I,
I'm 65, Jim. I love that game. I'm just so mad I didn't play it 3 or 4 years ago when everybody was trying to get me out there to play. Now you can't get me off the pickleball court.
oh, that's awesome. No, it's a great fun sport. People play it all the time. Ironically, I'm actually recovering from shoulder surgery. So I've been bodybuilding and obviously can't bodybuild when your arm doesn't work because your shoulder is healing. So I'm recuperating from that. But that's kind of what I've gotten into is bodybuilding. But anyway.
I got into that in 1989 when I put myself in treatment. When you take away something, you need to add something positive. So when I got off of cocaine, I worked out in replace of that. So I continue to
Did
work
you
out,
compete?
stay healthy. Huh?
Did you compete?
I competed. Yes, I competed
Good for
in
you.
1990 and 1991. I got the pictures. I'll show them to you sometime.
Love to.
So it's so important to do that, and I'm glad you're working out and taking care of yourself. I had 2 shoulder surgeries, and I'm going to have a shoulder replacement, but I'm still working out. Nothing can stop me. Jim, raising your children, I think it's important, and I'm so glad you understand this issue because you get to talk with your children about the issue of homosexuality without any apologies. I just did an interview with a guy by the name of Neil Malman who teaches apologetics.
I'm friends with Neil. I know Neil well.
Yeah, Neil, we become friends. I love him. I just finished an interview with him.
Awesome.
Can't wait to air this and have him share the video that he's going to do for my conference. But Neil's amazing. So when we're talking about apologetics for children, how are you raising your children differently than how you were raised? Because even though you had a father and a mother, dad was never around. What are you doing differently as a dad?
So a couple of things. I actually talked briefly about this book and Not a Mistake, Parents Hope for Their Gay Son, how, and I kind of weave in a little bit how coming out of the gay lifestyle has actually been a unique way to parent better and to be a better husband to my wife.
Mm-hmm.
So we are very unusual, and I will say we are abnormal compared to culture, and I'm proud of that, Janet. We don't allow screen time. Our kids don't have phones. They don't have devices. We don't even have a television in our home. My realtor goes, "Why do you want an 81-inch TV if you don't watch it?" I said, "Well, on occasion, we'll watch a classic Disney or National Geographic or something that's of educational value. But we don't allow any of that narrative in our home, let alone social media or anything." So guess what, Janet? My kids have no idea what LGBTQ is. They are completely shielded from that. And you know what I'm loving is as they're developing into their own sexual identity as little boy and my little girls, you know what? My little boy has a crush on a little girl in Sunday school class. My daughter has a crush on this little boy. And I told my wife the other day, this is the most beautiful thing to see these little buds begin to develop. Now, my
How old are your children, Jim?
10, 7, and 5.
Okay, 10, 7, 5.
So we haven't had to have this conversation. I mean, when we were at Disneyland, we went to one day, we had annual passes. We're walking down Main Street and, it's getting overrun by LGBTQ people, like over proportionately. And we just decided, you know what, we're going to leave. And we don't want our children exposed to that behavior. And I'll just leave it at that. So they have no idea. Now, they know the word gay. When they first said the word gay, it freaked me out. They were quoting my title, Not a Mistake, Parents Hope for Their Gay Son. And I'm like, oh, my word. But they have no idea what that word means. Mm-hmm. So we're good with that because they're not exposed to sinful behaviors. They're not exposed to inappropriate sexual content. They're not being sexually abused. Nor have they been sexually abused. So we've been able to shield them from the evils of this world and really let them grow up in the ways of the Lord. So
you're in the world, but you're not a part of the world. However, correct me if I'm wrong, and every parent gets to parent their child however they want. Government doesn't get to parent our children. Correct. So we get to do whatever we want. When do you get to a place, Jim, in your home? Because a lot of parents probably are thinking what you're thinking. I'm not telling my kids about homosexuality because Neil and I just talked about that. The age group, why is he teaching apologetics from 6 to 11-year-olds? And he gave me his reasoning, but eventually our kids are going to find out about homosexuality. And a lot of times, even being out with our friends, they might not bring it to our attention, but kids are smarter than we give them credit for, because if they don't hear from you, they're going to hear from somebody else. When do you and your wife talk about this issue with your kids, as you will with not having sex outside of marriage?
So what we've done is we homeschool our children. So they're not being indoctrinated by public schools, which are demonic prisons. We can have a whole nother conversation about that and why that is true. And why would you send your child to a demonic prison? And we're seeing the results of it, honestly, all across California, let alone the United States.
Yes.
But our children are homeschooled, and God bless my wife, she's a saint for doing this. But we'll do it when it's appropriate. And at this time, it's not appropriate. But let me tell you, are you familiar with Matt Walsh? What is a Woman? a UCLA PhD scholar in female or women's studies could not identify what a woman was. Now, my 5-year-old was 4 or 3 at the time when What is a Woman came out.
Yeah.
She could tell you at 3, 4 years old, Daddy, a woman has a vagina, a boy has a peanut, because she couldn't say the word peanuts. So my children are being brought up in a way that they know God's design for marriage. It's a man and a woman. They know there are 2 sexes, as it says in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created man and woman. So they are being instilled with God's truth, not the lies, not the confusion, from the culture or wherever that would come from. They're hearing God's truth and designed for men and women. And Janet, and this is kind of what spurred me to write another. Now I'm writing these other books. A children's book series called The Button Kids, cute as a button. And it's an age-specific series, 0 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and then 9 to 11, then a teenage book, introducing these topics that we're talking about at age appropriateness. I think it's the book 3 to 5 talks about sometimes people get confused and they think there's something when they're not. Now, I don't talk about, trans and, people transitioning or detransitioning. I just start planting the seeds. Sometimes people get confused from God's plan, but we know science supports God's plan. Genetically, there are 2 sexes, male and female, and they've got chromosomes. So I'm not only doing this with my children, but I'm going to provide a children's book series to help parents have these conversations at age appropriateness so their kids can be equipped with a culture that, frankly, is full of deception and lies.
We're living in the end of the end times, as we know. Those of you that are listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes, I'm talking with Jim Domen, who has a ministry called Church United, a beautiful ministry. We'll talk about his books. Pastors, ministry leaders, if you are watching this, please have him come speak to your staff, your church, your youth group. He'll do an amazing job. I just love this guy, and I love how he handles himself and how he carries himself and what he does with his family. If you're listening to this, please share this with somebody else that has a child or a loved one that is dealing with homosexuality. This issue is so important, especially right now when we're living in the end of the end times, coming up on Great Gay Pride Month in June. Jim, what would you tell a parent if their young child is dealing with same-sex attraction or LGBT issues, even though they hijacked the alphabets? I stop at LGBT.
All right. I totally understand that, Janet. You know what? I 2 things. If your child's under the age of 18 and still living under your roof, you're responsible for your child. And I would hope and encourage that they're going to church with you, that they're going to church on a regular basis. I would encourage a Christian counselor to help them journey and walk through what's going on, understanding root causes of same-sex attraction. But moms and dads, here's the key point. You must, and I talk about this in my book, vet the counselor. So many will tell you, oh, I'm a Christian. I believe the word of God. And behind those closed doors, they are teaching your child how to transition, how to come out, that homosexuality is God-given. This is who they are. Go express yourself. And they call themselves Christians, and they're wolves in sheep's clothing. So parents, it's really up to you. And I would even say vet your pastor if you don't know how to respond to this, to make sure your pastor has a biblical worldview of sex, marriage, and sexuality, as well as that hopefully a trusted therapist that's not a heretic that would help point your child in the right direction and choose righteousness instead of a behavior that is sinful.
Jim, I totally agree that we should vet anybody that we don't know that's going to come in contact with our children or our family, because I have a few friends who sent their children to counselor. They didn't vet them. They didn't Google them. They got this information from somebody that doesn't live in the Christian faith. They said these people are Christians. And here they told their child it's okay to live a homosexual life. Are you kidding me? So now the child walks away saying, well, the counselor said it was okay. Now you want to send me to another counselor? Make up your mind. So it really becomes confusing to the child as you pick out the counselor. Now you want to take me away from it. So I concur, vet that counselor, vet pastors and ministry leaders, because everybody doesn't believe what we believe, Jim. A
Yeah,
lot
and
of pastors and leaders aren't talking about homosexuality. Please go ahead.
yeah, and let me address real briefly, if I may, children over 18 years of age. If they're an adult and maybe no longer your roof, or maybe they are under your roof in college, moms and dads, how I recommend and encourage parents to respond is what my parents did. They set very strict boundaries. I could not bring my partner home. I was always welcome to come home, holidays, home for whatever reason. Although I was 23, I was post college. In my early 20s, actually, I was in the lifestyle 23 to 28. But they set some very, very rigid rules. And they said your partner can't come over for Easter, can't come over for Christmas, Thanksgiving, you name it. And I read the riot act to them, Jan. I said, how dare you call yourself Christians? You don't know God, you don't know Jesus. If you really did, you would love me and my partner, et cetera, et cetera. But I love them for this day for being that rigorous with their boundaries and not compromising on truth. And when I came back to the Lord, they invited me to come back into their home. I had a safe place, a sanctuary to go home to during my restoration period. And really, it was healing on many levels. But I just share that with moms and dads. It's okay to exhibit tough love. It may strain the relationship, but you know what? You're doing what's right.
Jim, I love that you shared that. You believe the same thing I do, but many other Christians don't. I believe that you can love somebody without compromising your morals and your values. Let me give you an example. Two of my board members, and they speak at my conference because they had a daughter living a life of homosexuality. And when she came back to the Lord 5 years ago, even though she's dealing with a lot of issues, she's getting counseling. This is what she said to her parents. Those of you that are listening that are parents, hear Jim, but hear me out. She said, Mom, if you had allowed my same-sex partner to come to the home, I don't know if I would have come back to the faith because you taught me one thing and your actions did another. Action speaks louder than the word. I concur with your parents. I tell parents that, look, if your child is living a homosexual life, their partner doesn't get to come over for Christmas and Thanksgiving and celebration of birthdays and all these other things. Because if you have a young child that is in the home, what they're going to believe is that they can have a homosexual relationship and a heterosexual relationship. That's where it gets confusing. They're like, well, they're not touching. How do you know when they walk out of the room, they're not taking a quick kiss?
You know what? And Janet, I tell you, the stories I hear from people who've left the lifestyle or the moms and dads who kept praying, they never stopped praying and interceding and fasting for their children, and they didn't compromise. I hear more of those stories of children coming back into right relationship with God. And I'm thinking, you told the story of your board members. I have a best friend from 5th grade who's still in the gay lifestyle. He modeled and, I mean, handsome, all that kind of stuff. His parents compromise repetitively. And I think what you just said is key. It's like, you really don't believe what you say. Why should I believe this? And he still is not walking with God to this day and still in the lifestyle.
But think about this, Jim, and those of you that are listening to this podcast, please share it with someone that is dealing with homosexuality. If you have a friend or a family member, please share it. Jim, I think it's important because if a child is living a homosexual life and they're bringing their same-sex partner over, they have everything they want. This devil got what he wanted. Now homosexuality has entered your home. You won't allow your heterosexual children, if they're not married, to sleep together in your home. You won't allow pornography. You won't allow drugs, but you allow a same-sex partner. The Bible said it's sin that a man should never sleep with another man as he does with a woman, and vice versa. Yeah. Are you kidding me? You can't live part of the Bible and then leave the rest of it out. You're either going to live for God and serve him wholeheartedly, or you're not. And excuse me, Jim, pastors that are listening to this, you heard me say this many times. If you're not teaching on homosexuality, get off the pulpit, because we need to talk about this issue all over the world.
And Jen, it is in everything. It's in social media. And what people don't even realize, why my kids aren't on social media, they are feeding this. They know what you like emotionally. They know what's happening with you psychologically, and they're feeding this narrative. And you almost don't stand a chance because your kids are on their devices longer than they are in interaction with people. And this narrative is being pushed there. It's being pushed in the public education. It's being pushed even in Christian universities, Janet. It's heresy, but nobody's calling it that, Janet. And it's like, I don't know. You understand the issue as a former lesbian yourself, but this is heresy, and people aren't preaching about it. Like you say, I'm totally. If you don't talk about this topic, get off the pulpit, because this issue is probably the greatest issue affecting the morality of America at this time.
Yes, it's one of the number one issues we're dealing with in America.
And it's in
Besides
everything. It's in
abortion.
commercials. It's on TV shows. It's in movies. I mean, we killed our TV back in 2013. It's been over a decade not having television. And by the way, we haven't supported the cable industry, which
Right.
puts out so much garbage. And I told my wife, we've saved over at least 10 or 20 grand not subscribing to subscription every month.
Well, the sad thing is some of us still have certain things that we have to go through. Here you think you're watching a great movie, and then all of a sudden it's like, are you kidding me?
I know.
Can't watch anything anymore. I might as well go back, I'm
Well, I'll say this.
65,
We've been
start
watching
watching Barney B. Jones again,
Well, we watched The Chosen, and I'm really impressed with The Chosen. That's been an excellent, but it's Christians producing a Hollywood quality film, and I am thoroughly impressed with Chosen. So there are a handful of still good, godly shows out there.
The sad thing, Jim, is, I was talking to the Benham brothers years ago, one of them, my book, and I asked them a question about why aren't Christian producers putting our stories out on the big screen? They're like, well, I don't think they'll let us do it. Who cares? Do it anyway.
Yep.
You know what I mean? If you intertwine it in a way like they intertwine, sexuality or same-sex couples in movies, I know they'll be able to get away with it. Jim, why do you think producers or Christians are not helping us put our stories out there like they should be?
Janet, I often think of that. Like I see The Chosen, someone like Dallas Jenkins. I think it boils down to fear. People are afraid. And here's what you and I deal with. We fear God, not culture, not the LGBTQ community.
Right.
We've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, we're over it. People fear the response of the LGBTQ community more than they do God. That's it. It's going to destroy. So I just did a documentary. It hasn't come out yet. What is a Christian?
Mm-hmm.
The Christian actor was in the Fast and Furious series. He said, my days are done in Hollywood. I've come out a believer. Actually, the male guy at Paramount led me to the Lord. I became a Christian. I kind of, you start doing Christian things, you get canned in Hollywood. So they're doing this, what is a Christian? He's like, I don't even care anymore because I'm going to do what's right and what God's calling me to do. But that's the reality. You get canceled. And, Dallas Jenkins, who did The Chosen, I read a little bit about his biography. He did some film or whatever he did flopped. And kind of like a last-ditch effort, he goes, you know what, God, I'm just going to give this over to you, and did The Chosen. And now it's like the best crowdfunding, most watched, self-funded series ever in the history of, film. Right. And it continues to be successful. So I think there's something to be said. Janet, I think the next great awakening is going to come through former LGBTQ people. Almost like the Jesus movement and the former drug issues back in the 60s and 70s. I think we're going to have an awakening of LGBTQ people coming to Jesus, and it's going to beg people to tell our stories that change is possible.
I hope we get there faster than we are now, because our stories are so important. If you notice, and those of you that are listening, I'm talking to Jim Domen, who has a ministry called Church United, and one of his books that came out, Not a Mistake, and we'll talk a little more about his book. I wish, my spiritual father, let me go there, James Robeson, wrote a letter, and it's on my website, and he wrote it to pastors and ministry leaders to let them know, or let me know that, hey, you can have Janet come to your church, and she's going to be transparent, she's going to be honest, and the reason why they should not fear talking about this issue, because they are afraid, and fear is a big thing. I don't comprehend that. My brain can't even go there and say, ordained pastor credentialed under the Assemblies of God. I mean, how can you be afraid to talk about something? But you said something that I believe is so true, is that they're more concerned about what's in their pocketbook, or how people are going to give, or how many people are going to leave their church. If God ordained you and he told you to start a church, he can sustain it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not
100%.
your church
Yes.
anyway. He's very
Yeah.
capable of sustaining your church and anything else that he has called you to do. Jim, many people say people are born gay. Are they?
There is no evidence anybody's born gay. And it goes back to my theory, it's development, it's environmental. But wait, I've known this all my entire life type of a thing. Well, as young children, developmentally, you are not cognizantly aware of what your environment is, what's happening. It all plays into the man or woman you're growing up to be. And that's why people think they've never known anything different because they weren't aware. And what's ironic, Janet, when I look at, I'm the president of the Global Rainbow Crossers Alliance of over 70 nations of former LGBTQ leaders. And there's this common theme, not just in America, all over the globe, black, brown, white, brown, I mean, anywhere in the globe, there's this common theme of a disconnect between the father. And, that plays a huge role. Even, hearing your story too, Janet, that when you see an abusive father, that scares girls and it makes safe, to be in an emotional safe relationship with the woman instead of a man. And we understand that, boys are more physical, girls are more emotional, where these issues lie. But it's that same theme throughout. It's not genetic. Science, there is no gay gene. There is no, you might have a propensity because, let's say, family sin, that's with any sin issue, if alcoholism or whatever runs in a family. That's why scripture talks about, we can be generational sin blockers. Actually, my next book coming out, Breaking Sin's Grasp, Your Temptation Doesn't Define You, briefly touches that topic because we can be generational stoppers of sin in our family lineage.
I love that the word propensity, because we all have a propensity or a bend towards something. You know what I mean? Whether it's homosexuality, transgenderism, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is. And we're always going to have temptation. It really bothers me when people decide to go back and say, well, I was tempted. Well, the Bible says, in First Corinthians, that I've given you a way to escape. I'm always going to give you a way out. You know what I mean? I put people, in your life to assist you and that you can call upon and pray with. But people, because they love the world or they love their sin more than God, that's where I go with that with people. There's no more excuses, and I don't accept them anymore, Jim. So they can be hard all they want, but there's no reason. People can leave the life of homosexuality, and you can leave it. Doesn't mean you're not going to have temptations. We're all going to have them as long as we're on this side of the planet. But homosexuality, you can be free from that. Do you agree?
Oh, 100%. And Janet, when I speak, I ask people the question, who here has never been tempted? Or who is no longer tempted? We're all tempted. That's why I subtitled Breaking Sin's Grasp, Your Temptation Doesn't Define You. Whatever your temptation is, Janet, my temptations, that's not my identity. That's not who I am. I can choose righteousness. I can choose brokenness. I can choose my wife. I can choose failure, destruction. I can choose my family. I can choose God. But again, it's all choices. And that's such a key thing. But what I really believe if I help men and women realize your temptation isn't your identity, that helps people understand and sets them free.
Yeah. Identity is a big thing. But before I bring that up, I know we're going to be running out of time soon. We talked about you're not born gay, and you mentioned earlier when we were talking that trauma was not something you went through. And a lot of people say, well, I didn't go through trauma, Jen. I wasn't raped like you. I wasn't abused like you. You weren't abused either. So, Jim, what are some of the root causes of homosexuality if trauma is not the only thing and there's other reasons?
So with boys, lack of a connection with dad, missing father, not connecting with other boys, always being last picked on the team. I remember always wanting a best friend. I would always go, tell my mom, I want a best friend. I don't. So I had this longing to connect with men or boys or friends, and it never happened. But guess what? When puberty kicked in, it becomes sexualized because legitimate needs aren't getting met. It becomes sexualized, hence I act out homosexually. And I really think it's similar with women. It's that emotional need. When those certain emotional needs aren't met with the woman or a young girl, lady, that they become sexualized at the point of puberty. And and that's why I think girls and boys think, well, I've always been this way. No, you haven't. There's been a breakdown of your environment and developmentally that led you askew to these paths.
Right. Jim, you have some books out, and we discussed one of them. You discussed one that's coming out. Can you share with my audience the books that you have out and where they can get those?
Absolutely. So my first book, Not a Mistake, Parents' Hope for Their Gay Son, is geared towards parents, really to bring you hope, because I put my parents through hell and they didn't have a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm.
You can get that at notamistake.com. Obviously, it's on Amazon, but I would appreciate if you get it through me instead of making Amazon richer. But notamistake.com. You can get it on Audible. I also have a video series and study guide coming out within the next month for Not a Mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And then my second book, Breaking Sin's Grasp, Your Temptation Doesn't Define You. You know what, Janet, your listeners may not be LGBTQ people, but I was in men's ministry for a good chunk of my pastoral time at church or on staff at a church. And I journeyed with a lot of men, helping them set free. I went through the same process with my journey as same-sex attraction, but I've done this with men with lust, drugs, alcohol, pornography, premarital sex, sex outside of marriage, to help set men free. And that's why I wrote or told their stories, Breaking Sin's Grasp, Your Temptation Doesn't Define You. But I'm literally just working with the illustrator now for the Button Kids series to help parents have these LGBTQ biblically appropriate conversations with their little ones from a board book all the way to the teenage years. And that's at buttonkids.com.
We need more books, and I'm glad you talked about your children's books, because I believe parents need something more for their child, especially from the ages 5, up until they're at least in junior high school. I wrote a kid's book and I never released it yet. I have not sent it to a publisher. As soon as I feel like in my heart that it's God's releasing me to do it, I will. I do have another book coming out. But also, I just did a curriculum with David Pickup, Jonathan Alexander. It's an 8-hour curriculum. We just all went and recorded it. I just went a week ago. They did it in November. I raised all the money for it. So I'm really excited because there's no curriculums out there for this particular issue.
Awesome.
Jim, how would they reach you? Did you give your email address? And
yeah, probably the easiest way is go to churchunited.com. That's my ministry. I have a ministry to pastors that help them engage in government, speak truth to power, and use their influence outside the walls of the church. But churchunited.com, you can fill out a form, and you'll probably hear from my assistant, Katie. She'll get in touch with you if you want me to speak. If you've need some counseling help, I do that. But yeah, the best way to reach me would be through Church United's website at churchunited.com.
Did you say when your new book is coming out? Did you mention
Probably
that?
within the month.
Okay. So we're going to get it out before Gay Pride Month.
Yes.
Praise the Lord. Well, Jim, you are a blessing. Those of you that are listening, Jim is astute on this issue of homosexuality. If you're a pastor, please invite him to come speak at your church, speak to your leaders. You will be blessed by everything he has to share with your staff, with your team, and even with your congregation. Jim, you are a blessing. I love you dearly. Thank you for being on Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes.
Love you, Janet. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes. Acts 10:34 says, God is no respecter of persons. God doesn't play favorites, which means what he has done for Janet, what he has done for guests on this show, he will do for you too. If you are struggling with anything, do not hesitate to reach out to Janet Boynes Ministries. They will do their best to help you any way they can. Go to the website, janetboynesministries.com. Janet loves you, and most importantly, God loves you. Have a blessed day.